Hey, how's it going? I'm Ben Lindell, and you are watching Puremix Live. As you may notice, we're not in our normal Puremix Live studio. I'm in New York City, and Ryan West is joining us. Where exactly are you again, Ryan?
I'm in Gig Harbor, Washington, which is just west of Seattle. It's really, sorry? It's Vaughan, excuse me, I was corrected. It's Vaughan, Seattle.
Washington.
I'm sorry. This is
You
what
don't even know where you are.
Vaughan, Washington. Yeah, not too far from Seattle.
It's very cool. That doesn't really look like that's a studio.
No, not really. You guys should definitely check out this view. It's absolutely amazing.
Nice. Well, so we weren't able to get together in a studio today, but we weren't going to let that hold us back from asking questions. We are doing, right now, we have a promo. I don't know if you're aware of this, Ryan, but we have a promo on your videos where people can watch your 2 full mixes and your video about delays.
Oh, cool.
All for $50. It's a steal.
I'll buy them.
Yeah, you should go buy them. You should probably watch them yourself. Brush up the old Ryan West tricks. But yeah, we thought this would be a perfect excuse to kind of put you in the hot seat and ask you some questions.
All right. Yeah, I'm ready for that.
Awesome, man. Cool. So,
While we do it.
The by far number one question we always are getting, like everyone wants to know how to deal with vocals, and you are the rap vocal expert, especially in the Puremix world. So how do you get rap vocals to work? Does it start with a microphone, the preamp, or does it all come down to how you mix it?
It's all of the above. I mean, it's always the same scenario almost in any genre that you work in. Is obviously getting it captured in the right way is the best, first step. For me, I go through microphones like everybody else goes through, changes of socks. I like to try out different things. So obviously you want to try different, radically different microphones when you first started working with an artist, but you can make some sort of like intelligent decisions beforehand. Some rappers sound great on an 87 through, a fairly, neutral preamp and just a little bit of compression or no compression going on the way in. But you have to make that decision every time you come into a new session. Sometimes I do, something that gives me a whole lot more tone. So I might go with an 87 or a 47 FET and then pop it through a tube preamp and into an opto compressor or a FET compressor. It really depends on what I think the tone needs at the time. Mm-hmm. It's the same during the tracking process as it is during the mixing process. You're just really trying to get the most appropriate tone, the most appropriate feel for the track. And sometimes they're much more laid back. You don't need such aggressive compression. You don't need such aggressive, preamp gain. Sometimes you need something that's a whole lot dirtier, something that's a whole lot more messy in terms of the compression. Mm-hmm. So I try to judge every time. But, one of the tricks that I use for hip hop vocals is not all that different from stuff they use for pop vocals, which is to say you use combinations of compression, like the old trick of using an LA2A first and then going into 1176 and getting something like 3 to 5 or 6 dB worth of gain reduction on both of them. Mm-hmm. And then using the LA2A to smooth things out, and then the 1176 to sort of bring it forward with kind of a medium attack time and a quick release time, just to sort of get that pumping and that breathing going on with the 1176. There's tons of tricks, but the truth is, with any other type of mixing, it's the same in hip hop, where you're making a judgment based on the individual production, the individual song, what the energy needs, and how the performance was delivered too, because that makes a huge difference.
So how much of that do you think of ahead of time? Like, are you kind of figuring this out just all as you go and kind of best adapting your signal flow and your options? Or do you really kind of study the track and study the artist to make sure that you're making an informed combination?
I don't really study anything, to be honest with you. I mean, to me, it's about making an emotional, kind of like urgent in the situation sort of decision. As soon as you hear it, you kind of decide like, well, I hear where it is now. Mm-hmm. It's like brash and it's dynamic. And what I really needed to do is I wanted the vocal to be much more forward. I want it to sit right here in the mix, like right in front of me, while I design the sound for the production to go around it and to be really solid sort of behind it. Those are the kind of decisions you're making every time you listen to a new set of raw tracks. When you sit down to a mix, I mean, for me, the ideal scenario is I get everything as raw as possible, and I can just sort of sit down, play with faders, get a relative balance, and then I can start to understand where things are poking out, what I need to do in terms of processing. I'm making decisions on the fly.
Yeah.
I don't think there's really, I mean, if you do hear the rough mix, there's sometimes where you can say, well, oh, yeah, I'd like to do this with that. And you get some sort of like rough, raw ideas, but it's always like a sort of a try and see sort of process.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I hear a lead vocal, I might try some sort of compression scheme or some sort of EQ scheme. But I'm also, at the same time, I'm thinking about, well, am I doing this right or wrong? Ultimately, does it come out with the result that I'm looking for? Maybe my idea was to smooth the lead vocal and bring it forward, or maybe my idea was to smooth it and bring it back and sort of plant it in the back of the mix and make everything super blended. The question you have to ask yourself is am I really achieving with all the stuff that I'm putting on it? Because we have all these options now, outboard, plugins, there's too many options. But ultimately, if you can answer the question, am I doing the thing that services the song in the way that I thought it was going to be when I started? If the answer is yes, then keep exploring that. If the answer is no, then you can keep trying different things. It's always an exploratory process. That's one of the things I love most about mixing is that you can try things. If they don't work, do something different.
So what's interesting there that I hear is like, the tracks that you receive, you don't have a lot of control over what those sound like. But when you're tracking a project, do you kind of think ahead and start compressing and kind of EQing, doing things to the vocal that you feel like are going to help you later on, or do you try to just go clean, flat, give yourself as much room to work when you get to the mix stage? That's
a great question. I'm mixing from the very beginning, so I'm mixing on the input stage. I try to capture things as close to what I want them to be in the end as possible. I don't see any reason why to wait. I mean, you're trying to build a sound palette. You're trying to build, this movement for the sound of the song that you're recording. I think it would be foolish to try to just capture everything super clean for some weird ideal that you want things to be super clean on the capture side. No, forget it. If you need EQ or compression on the way in, if you need to dial in a bunch of, a preamp gain on a kick drum or a snare drum to get that kind of like crush from an Eve preamp for a kick or a snare, you just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
I don't really fear anymore making decisions on the fly. I mean, because I think trying to make up for it later is a little foolish.
So as a person who receives tracks from places all around the world, would you give that same advice to people? Or would you?
I absolutely would. Because, what I've been surprised more times, sometimes you can get a little insulated as a mixer when you're just getting tracks in from people all over the world, and you're trying to give your clients a formula so that they can submit stuff to you that you can work with. But I've been surprised more than a few times where clients have handed me things that are EQ'd and they're processed and they might even have verb on them and stuff like that. I'm starting to trust producers actually even more because I think maybe I'm just extremely fortunate with the people that I'm working with is that, these people have an idea of what they want things to sound like. And you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. And as a mixer, like you always like to think that I'm in control of the sound and I control everything, blah, 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 blah. But if you get fantastic tracks from a producer or an artist who's doing things in their bedroom, who cares? I don't care what you do with it that, made it sound amazing. Sometimes these people have inspiration that you should just go with. I mean, I get excited by that now when I get tracks in, from a producer way far off in Nowheresville and they've already sort of designed a sound to it. In my initial conversations with people when I start to work with them, I tell them, look, send me the stuff wet, printed with this stuff that you really, really like. And please just be open to the idea that if I call you, I might say, hey man, I really need that background track split out. Or I might need that snare with no reverb and no EQ on it because I don't feel like it fits in. But I also do now get excited to trust the producer and the artist to design the sound that they're going for. And if I need them to augment something, I try to set up with them beforehand a way to have that conversation.
So, I mean, is that a function of producers are getting better at engineering and providing you with better sounding tracks, or is that a function of you trusting producers to do that?
I'm not totally certain, but I'd have to assume that it's a function of producers getting better because the tools are getting better, and the sound sets are getting a whole lot better, and the expectation of something sounding interesting or exciting is a little bit higher, I think, now.
So, dude, we're getting some amazing questions even coming through on the live chat here. One of them is from Timmy, where he's asking, what's your process for prepping a session? Like, do you fold, and more specifically, if you have like 20 plus tracks of backgrounds, do you fold them down to stereo pairs?
I'm not opposed to that, and there have been times that I do that, but I like leaving my options open. But I maybe I ride a middle ground in that like I'll tend to group them all together, and then I'll bust them together inside the session, and I'll treat them as a stereo pair, but I still have control over all the individual stuff, because a lot of times I want to do like very maybe limited specific stuff to the individual vocals. So if they give me a chorus section that's all split out into 16 tracks and I can pan them wherever I want, a lot of times I want to roll off some of the low end, or sort of tweak the individual tracks so that they flow into the bus compression for the group in a certain way. I don't want them to be too bulky, and so trying to mix them all together that way. Sometimes they actually do need correction if it was recorded in a room where like you get a little bump at a certain frequency in the low mids or something. You might want to subtract that on each individual track, or even if it needs tuning, you might want to do that on all the individual tracks. But then I bust them together and treat them as a group. And generally, I'll compress them and maybe even EQ them, and maybe add whatever spatial effects, reverb or delay or what have you. And I'll treat that as, in fact, sometimes I'll actually hide all of those individual tracks, and I'll just have my bus control. And so it makes the visual for my mix session a bit more simplified, where I have one fader as opposed to looking at 16 plus my auxiliary group. But that's part of, I guess, my philosophy for organizing myself for a mix. I tend to set up in the same way very frequently. If there's one thing that I do repeat from mix to mix, it's just sort of the visual layout of all the elements of the mix. I'll tend to take the kick drum and the 808s, if there's one, and the bass, and sort of move them all the way to the left of the session. And then I'll have my drum kit, my percussion, my bass, guitars, keyboard pads. Like I kind of have sections that I can sort of reliably move through from left to right in my session, work on it in a sort of organized manner.
Nice. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. We had another question here regarding how you approach mixing a whole record. So, he was asking in terms of like schedule, workflow, mix settings, but the question I really liked here was, how do you approach each track so that it sounds unique but also cohesive as part of an album?
Oh, okay. So I think that has to do with pre-planning sometimes. When I first talk to an artist or a producer who has an entire album's worth of stuff, we talk about, what's the vision for the record. We try to put out as many adjectives as possible. We talk about, does this thing feel like it belongs in this decade or another decade? We compile a list of references so we can sit there and listen to a whole bunch of stuff that inspired them before they made this record, and I can kind of get a vibe where they were going with it. What's the sound in their head? I listen to the reference mixes that came out of the daily studio sessions, so I can get a sense where they were heading with it. And I try to build a palette as much as possible before we even get into the record. So now I have this sort of guideline to go with.
Yeah.
And that helps with consistency from one record to the next. But I'm also always going back and checking. I'm listening to the first mix I did when I'm working on the fourth mix or the fifth mix. And then by the time I get to the end, I try to look at them all as a whole. I'll print a rough copy of all the mixes in whatever state they're in, import them into one session where I can flip back and forth between them and make an analysis of, how do these sound so different? Is the low end freakishly different in the first things that I mixed than in the I mixed? Is the vocal sitting in the same place? Is my palette of effects that I use from one song to the next so drastically different? Is it different enough too? Because you don't want to be that static from one record to the next, even though they belong in the same release.
Yeah. So
I think it's a continual reevaluation, throughout the process.
It's interesting because what I hear in there is it's less about the settings and more about listening and knowing the vibe and having that palette in your mind rather than necessarily in your Pro Tools session always working at the same stuff.
Yeah, I think it's foolish to try to expect things to be consistent in terms of settings and gear and sounds that you use from one to the next. What you're looking for is an overall patina of a feeling that things belong together, because that's how, when people listen to the record in the end, they're not going to be thinking about, oh my gosh, did he use an EVQ on that vocal, and then on the next one he used an API. No, they don't care about anything like that. They just care about whether it feels consistent, and whether they were able to experience moving through the stories in a record from one song to the next and then through to the end.
Nice. Well,
we get too analytical about gear and stuff. I think we get lost in the sauce.
Exactly. And once again, we're segueing right into this next question. We're getting a ton of comments, even here on the chat, about vocal microphones. What are your favorites? What sort of, obviously listening and evaluating artists and having this history of using all these different microphones. Can you walk people through kind of your process for, how do you intellectualize? How do you come up with what microphone am I going to put in front of the singer today? Okay,
so Ben, you're probably a lot like me. You've been working as a tracking and mixing engineer and producer for a long time, and so you kind of know what the characteristics of different mics are. Mm-hmm. So when you hear a person's vocal, and you might immediately think to yourself, kind of, nasally, and I need to find something that would maybe complement that characteristic. Something that's a bit scooped. It's lower in the mid range and maybe better on the high end. So you might go for a Sony C800 or something like that. Or if you need something that needs a sparkly top end, you might go for an AKG C12. So the characteristics of these microphones, and so you'll choose one and try it. I think coming out with the best possible scenario with a microphone that matches up to an artist's voice is just making those decisions early on, and then just trying it. And if it doesn't work, have other choices available. So if I had a vocalist, if I had a female vocalist that I thought needed some sparkle and some air on the top end, I might try a 251, a Telefunken, Elam 251, and I might have something more neutral on deck to try if that doesn't work out, if it's too much. But the mic is only part of the solution. Obviously, it's a preamp thing too. One particular mic might sound fantastic with one preamp, and then you move to the next one, and it can completely fall apart on you. So you're always looking for that particular combination for artists that really works for them. And you just have to know all the characteristics, all the gear that you're putting in there, and then you have to make a sort of a quiet, detailed study, a thought process of what that artist is all about. But that all goes out the window as soon as you put it up and you try it, and you try it against the track that you're working with. Your prediction could be perfectly, suited for it, but you have to be prepared to say and reevaluate it and say, hey, this is either really working, this makes me stomp my foot on the floor, that's how awesome it is, or anything less is not right. It has to really excite you when you're in the tracking process. There should never be a time, I don't think, or at least for me, there should never be a time when you're just like, oh, well, that's okay. Maybe I can do something with it in the mix. To me, I think it's a big fail. You got to get it right on the way in. I have a lot of favorite microphones. I mentioned a couple of them. I mean, I love, Tube 67s and 47s, FET 47s. I really love the Lauten Atlantis that we get to use a lot at Flux. The 80s, the Venerable 87 is a great workhorse. That being said, these are all favorites for certain reasons in certain scenarios. I don't think there's a whole lot of microphones you could say that work for everything. There are a few that do the trick quite often, like an 87, sort of just, because it's such a clean, clear, open sound, it works on a lot of things. There's even some, pretty inexpensive Audio-Technica microphones that I use on a whole bunch of different stuff that I feel like are just great utility microphones. But again, it's always, it's on a per, incident sort of thing where you have to just judge every time. You have a source and you have to put your ear to it, figure out what it needs, what's going to respond the best to it.
Yeah. It's always so funny. I feel like, especially as on the come up, as I was learning and growing in this industry, like I thought, all right, as soon as I can use an 87 on a session, I'll finally have the vocals that everybody on major records has. No. That's the assumption you would always make, right? Is as soon as I get this piece of gear, then I'm finally going to sound the way that all my heroes do. And
back in like 2000, we were all like, we all need that Avalon.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Everybody's using, and it sounds amazing, but we know better now.
Yeah, exactly. So have there been cases where you've put up a C800 or 47 or 87 and been like, nope, that's not it. I gotta try something else, and possibly something more affordable.
All the time, every day. I mean, you're always sort of making guesses about what you think is going to work. I think the key to getting a successful sound is that you're always reevaluating that, and you're always paying attention. And even though you've made a decision, or you've made a judgment call, and you say, this is the way I'm going to approach this, when you get into it, that's the real litmus test, right? It's not the end of the road where the mix finally gets its way onto, Hot 97 at Tucson, where you decide whether you made the right vocal mic choice or not. You should be making that choice all the way through. From the second that you hear the first vocal pass, you'll probably know whether that's really working or not, if you're listening.
That's the key. If you're listening.
Yeah.
Be listening at all times. So I have this great question. This is a very specific question. Do you remember on Action Bronson's City Boy Blues, there's an effect on the vocals that give it like a really big soundstage. Do you recall at all what you did on that one?
Well, here's the thing. This question is a little funny. I mixed that entire record, except that song.
Oh no!
That was Ronson, and I don't think they went much. I did see all the stuff they did with it. From my best recollection, they used mono verbs that were sort of like right behind the lead vocal. And they also used an ambience that was stereo. So the mono verb was sort of like right behind the vocal. That gave the impression of like lots of depth behind him. I often employ the same sort of things. Matter of fact, I took a lesson from Al Schmidt years ago where he described his LCR plate mixing technique, where essentially he was setting up a left extreme, pan extreme left, pan extreme right plate, and then one right down the center. These were all mono plates. So instead of addressing sort of a stereo input to a plate reverb and then trying to use the input pan to decide where it was going to be placed in the spectrum, he actually designed 3 separate plates, and he would just use a triple bus system to put it in, a certain spectrum. And what he would be doing is he'd be high passing and low passing the plates that are on the left-hand side to sort of like let the left and right-hand sides to let them sort of like live by themselves. And then a different EQ scheme for the one that was in the center. So you get to decide, even with plates, you get to design the space.
Yeah.
And everything's going to sit just by making 3 separate ones, not just relying on some sort of stereo plugin or some sort of stereo, aux sends situation on your console.
So do you actually set it up like that inside Pro Tools with 3 mono aux tracks as your 3 different plates?
Yeah, I treat Pro Tools or mixing in any DAW exactly as I would treat it mixing on a console. So as to say, I use the same sort of busing structure where I might have 3 individual sends on a vocal, where one is left, one's center, one's right, and then I choose how much I'm going to send to each one. And that could be completely different for like maybe an ad-lib vocal lives a little bit over here to the right or the left in the mix. I'll design my send scheme so that it represents putting that thing in a physical space. Every time I'm mixing, I'm trying to design stuff to be in a physical space. I want to design the mix room.
Yeah.
So how much ambience is there? What kind of early reflections are there? Are there any much longer delay-based effects that I want to use? Is there chorus where I can spread stuff out on the stage, or ensemble type effects? So I'm actually just thinking about things in a 3-dimensional space when I design the mix, and I design reverbs, to that end, and delays to that end. I'm trying to create front to back depth with those kind of instruments. I think mono reverbs have been something that I've recently been really much more interested in, because if you just use stereo reverb sends and returns, then you're just getting this wash across the space. You're robbing yourself of the ability to design exactly where each thing is going to physically live inside that mix space.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big practitioner of trying to rein myself back from just using stereo reverbs and then using mono reverbs and placing them at different places in the mix. Don't be afraid to use 3, 4, 5, 6. That's why some of these studios have 4 or 5 plates in their basement, because they're just trying to get that extra ability to place things dimensionally inside the mix without limitation.
I mean, I think that's super important because most people, when they think of mono stereo or mono reverbs, are always thinking, oh, well, then that means it stays in the middle, or maybe it's hard on one side. But you're right, you can put anything anywhere you want, whatever sounds and feels good. Like, that's what you got to go for.
You know, Ben, maybe that's a plugin we should do. We should do the Reverb Array.
Right.
So it's like you have like 8 reverbs, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can pan to all these things in sort of like a surround panning sort of thing, where you can just place things physically inside the mix with their own reverb dimension behind it.
Yeah, that'd be super cool. And I mean, something that, you know, the question I get constantly asked about this when it comes to vocals is like, how do I get a real upfront, very present sounding vocal? You know, most people's default answer to this is like, oh yeah, you just compress the hell out of it, and that's what brings it forward. But I think you and I are both educated. There's other ways to make things sound like they're forward without just compressing the shit out of it. What
Right.
are some ways that you do that?
Well, I mean, you have to make a decision every different song you come up on. And sometimes compressing the living crap out of it is the answer.
Yeah.
It depends on what it is. I mean, and so sometimes I have lots of different little tools in my toolkit for doing just that sort of thing, and they range all the way from, you know, putting an 1176 on it, and then an LA2A, and then EQing it, and then de-essing it, and then throwing a limiter on it, so that you just get the thing to go right here, and it's like right in your face, and it's there in exactly the same place all the time. And it can be as simple as just, you know, riding the vocal in just the right way. If it doesn't need that much dynamic control, if it doesn't need, you know, an element of change in terms of its attack and its release, and you don't want to hear that effect of the compression sort of reining everything in, then maybe what you really want to do is you want to sit there and meticulously ride the vocal. I mean, that's the ultimate dynamic control. If you want to preserve the sound of something, the timbre of it, and the way that it was recorded, not change its tonal characteristic, not change its compression characteristic, then yeah, riding that fader is the key. So I make a decision every time. If I really want something to be forward, you know, I mean, one of the general schemes is to use an LA2A, then an 1176, with a little bit of subtractive EQ beforehand so that you get it exactly right going into the compressor. You get like 4, 5, 6 dBs worth of gain reduction on an LA2A, same thing on an 1176 with, you know, sort of a medium attack time and a quick release. And then you re-EQ to sort of contour it the way that you want to, then de-essing, and then maybe some sort of limiting. You know, for EDM and pop vocals that really need to be like super right there in your face, that might be one of the things that I go for first, but that doesn't mean that's always going to work. Yeah. Sometimes I subtract from that. Sometimes it's too much compression. Sometimes I might even need more. I mean, you know, I'm not adverse to doing anything. If it takes me putting 5 compressors on a vocal in order to get it where I want it to be, I don't care. It's all about the feel of it. And I'm constantly, you know, using references and reevaluating the mix as I go along to make sure that I'm still in the right zone.
So in that same vein, how do you treat double vocals and ad-lib vocals, especially in rap hip hop music? You know, every artist kind of seems to have their sound or their way that they do it. How do you inject yourself into that part of the process?
I know what I like to hear, and you know, some of the mixes that I've done, you know, have, you know, the artist or the producer has asked for something that I wouldn't normally do. I'll give you a good example. When I was working on Eminem's Recovery, Eminem has a very set way that he likes to do his vocals, and it's all of his backgrounds and ad-libs are straight up the middle. They're all right. Yeah, and that's, you know, I mean, usually with a lot of hip hop records, you're trying to create more space, trying to create more dynamic space, because you're dealing with sampled or electronic drums, and they don't have much ambience or space to them most of the time. And maybe a sample or maybe a couple of sparse instruments, and you're trying to fill out a whole mix with that. So part of the temptation sometimes is to take background vocals and get one here, get one there, create some dynamic left and right. I maybe a B section or a pre-chorus or even a chorus or a bridge comes up, and you want to spread things out and like make them nice and wide to expand the space so that the mix feels bigger at that point. But with him, he just always really liked everything up the middle. He doesn't like reverb at all. He doesn't like, you know, a whole lot of spatial effects. But that's, you know, if you take a step back and not be the mix engineer for a moment and listen to his catalog of music, you realize that his whole deal is, you know, he's focused on his lyricism. He's focused on his delivery and his energy and all that kind of stuff. And it makes sense. He doesn't want really anything to be there that's artificial or that detracts from his delivery. So there's a lot of other factors that go into play into when, you know, you're deciding exactly how to define the physical space where the vocal should live in a track. So it's a different case scenario every time, and you have to sort of like think about a lot of those factors at the same time.
So, I mean, what a lot of people kind of struggle with is, you know, they'll have an idea like that in their mind of like, okay, I want the vocal to be here, I want it to sound like Eminem. You know, is the way to get there, you know, there's obviously a million different variables in between, you know, your everyday white rapper and Eminem. Like, how do people start matching the sound that they hear in their head with what they're getting back out of their speakers?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think you can go about it a number of different ways. Here's the two ways that I look at it. You can really enjoy all the music that you love, and you can take all that, you know, sort of sonic information and put it in your pocket as tools. You can say, all right, well, I really love all this stuff, and these are the things that inspire me, but I'm not going to really keep all that in the forefront of my mind when I go to work on a project. I'm going to try to do what's the best thing for that project, and let my inspiration guide me to, you know, to do whatever. Or you can be really analytical about it. You can say, you can sit down with a record for the first time with an artist and say, all right, well, I hear all these elements, and I'm going to design the way that I think this should work. I'm going to take Eminem's vocal technique. I'm going to take Dr. Dre's sort of drum techniques, and I'm going to marry those two things together. You can get really analytical and academic about it. I tend not to, though. I mean, honestly, for me, those are all just tools of inspiration. When I hear them, I get excited by a certain sound, or a way a kick and a snare works together, or the way a vocal lays over top of a production. And that's just something that I admire. And when I feel like it's appropriate, I might go after that specifically. It might remind me of that. But I don't really ever design it. I really love the sort of like urgent nature of just hearing something for the first time and then kind of deciding to move on it, and just figuring out as you go along.
Nice. Well, it was interesting watching. I just went back and watched your Asher Roth video and the Dejuice with John Legend, the two videos that you have on Puremix. Have you watched your own videos at all?
No, no, I don't. That's too horrifying.
Have you ever? So I'm interested. Where do you pick up tricks now? Like, do you watch Puremix videos? How does someone who's, you know, busy in the studio every day, working and doing what we do, how do you keep coming up with new ideas?
Yeah, Puremix has been great because, I mean, I never had the opportunity to be in a studio long term with somebody who was a whole lot more experienced than myself. You know, I kind of learned on my own. So having access to, you know, videos like that are on Puremix and stuff that's on YouTube too is really fantastic, man. I get to hear ideas from people who have gone about things in their own way and learned in a completely different way than I did, and maybe have different inspirations and different impetus for doing, you know, what they do. Those are huge to me. I've spent the last 20 years in and out of studios all around the world, and I've learned more, I think, from assistant engineers and second engineers who had like another guy in the night before, and they're like, oh, we did this really cool thing. And I learned something completely new, and then, you know, I try it. Sometimes it makes it into my repertoire, or sometimes it doesn't. But I try to learn things every day from as many different places as possible. Now, you know, I wish I had the, you know, video resources that we have now, like with YouTube and Puremix and all the different sources of information about, you know, other mixers talking about how they work. I couldn't even imagine it. I mean, I learned pretty much everything from books and trial and error.
Yeah.
In the 5, 6, 7, 8 years of doing this. So it's a different era now. I mean, I think it's I don't think you can really calculate the value of being able to have people like Fab DuPont and Andrew Sheps and Mick Gazowski, telling us how they actually make these awesome records. I mean, so I'm constantly a student, man, and I don't do that as like a sort of a business model. It's just because I love this shit. Like it actually excites me and titillates me to learn something new. When somebody turns something that I thought I knew on its head, I'm like, wow, that's awesome.
Well, that's really cool. We had a good question come in here about like the work-life balance aspect of of what we do, of having a career in audio. Like, I mean, you and I talk all the time. Like, we both know how insane and how busy our schedules will get from project to project. And at the moment you're in beautiful Vaughan, Washington. So it feels, you're giving people the false sense that you do have some sort of work-life balance in there. Tell us, how do you do it day to day here in New York City with learning, growing, actually doing the work, networking, all the things that go into a career?
I wish I could say that I was good at it. I'm not. The temptation is, I think, for all of us who are, entities of our business is sort of like a separate entity. We're not attached to a studio. We're freelancers. We're contractors, and so we have to try to figure out how to balance all those kind of things. I wish somebody would tell me, because I have no idea. I mean, I find myself in situations where I've overcommitted a little bit for work. I mean, recently that's been a thing for me where like I really just said yes to too many things, and the balance has got completely out of whack. I'm working as much as I possibly can. I'm at my theoretical, limit, and there's still way too much to do. I think that's a skill to be able to manage and balance things. And maybe the best answer is try to work on your personal and family life as much as possible, because everything else is going to seem to be like work related. If you go out to a show, like it's still work related. You're thinking about, hey man, how can I get involved in this, or this is not for me. Most of the time you spend is also talking to new clients, conferring with clients that you're working with at the moment, chasing down bills that invoice from Sony that's 90 days old. They don't seem to care.
Yep.
I mean, you spend a whole lot of time working on those kinds of things when it's your own business and you're a sole proprietor and a contractor.
Yeah.
But that's super, super important, because you can't do good work without having the other stuff too at the same time.
Exactly.
So you do find a way to pay attention to, like I really do try to, spend as much time as I can. Not lately. I've been guilty of this lately, but I do try to spend as much time as I can, staying connected with my family and the people I care about and love. Spending time with my friends, if it's just going out for a beer once every 3 weeks or whatever, that's what it is.
So,
but you got to stay.
You kind of have life and also be in the studio at the same time, basically.
You can, but I think if you're really, if you're onto something, then you have to just accept that there's probably going to be a couple of months where you have to disappear a little bit.
So,
So
thinking back to like the earlier period in your career, what were like one or two things that really helped you start jumping ahead as a younger engineer?
Networking. I mean, you have to let people know what you do and that you're willing to be involved, and you have to insert yourself into the culture of making records wherever you are.
Yeah.
Just try not to be a dick, first off. I mean, that helps. That's rule number one in life, right? Don't be a dick.
Yep.
We violate that pretty often, but try not to. Oh, no, but the networking thing is really, really important. I mean, you have to be involved in the community. If nobody knows who you are, what you're doing, where you are, you're not going to get the call. Nobody's going to think of you and say, hey, listen, I just talked to, Ben. He's like this really cool engineer from New York, and he's willing to work and he's ready to make a record. Let me just call him when it comes up, comes time for my project. And that could be anything. It could be anything from a no budget indie thing where, at least you're getting the opportunity of somebody calling you and say, hey, Ben, you know what my project's about. If you're really into it, I really like you to be a part of it. I don't have so much of the budget or whatever, but then they let you make that decision of whether you can be involved in it or not. Yep. But you have to be present, and you have to know these people, and you have to be on the forefront of where records are being made in order to be considered for them at all. People aren't just, look on the internet. If they have a major record that they're going to do, they're not going to just look on the internet and Google engineer, and then your name comes up and you're the one that they call. I mean, I'm sure that happens from time to time, but you want to be the person who's offering something, who has stuff to bring to the table.
Yeah.
Hey man, I really dig your music. I think we could take it to the next level. I know that if you want to have me involved, I can add to this thing and we can make it a better project overall. You have to insert yourself into that community.
So I think, have you pitched yourself to be involved in projects before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I still do all the time. Like sometimes I'll hear something, I'll just be like, I don't know where you guys are with this, but I just really, really, really like it. And if there's a way that I can be involved, I'd love to figure that out. And that's sort of I think a very genuine thing you can say to an artist, because if they're working on it, chances are by the time you've heard it, are aware of it, they've been working on it for quite a long time. These are people who are putting, all of their energy and their resources into making this record happen. This is their dream coming to fruition. At that point, you're somebody saying, hey, look, I think I have something to add to it. And you're trying to present yourself as somebody who can elevate what they're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I insert myself into projects all the time. When I hear something that's awesome, I'm just like, oh God, I'd love to do that. I don't really care. Like sometimes this is really bad business, decision making, but sometimes I'm just like, I don't really care what the money's like.
Yeah.
Get a sandwich and give me a cup of tea and we'll make this happen. You know what I mean? Because sometimes you just know when you want to be involved in something, and it's a luxury to make that decision.
Again, I'm trying to really want to keep this, we're trying to help people out who are getting started or, on their way to becoming the engineer producer that they want to be. What would you say is like one or two mistakes that you see younger engineers, producers making over and over again?
A big one is something that I was confronted with early on, and I'm actually very thankful for it at this point, is trying to jump into doing something sooner than you're ready for. So here's the example. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was working for a dance remix producer named Jonathan Peters, and he was doing these huge remixes. Like he did Whitney Houston's My Love Is Your Love, and like a lot of these really big, what became big dance tracks. And he had a co-producer who was working with him, who was a really nice guy. I won't mention his name because I don't know if he'd want to be seen in this light, but he was actually very kind to me. I mixed a track for them, and he pulled me aside one day and he said, look, maybe you jumped into mixing too early. And it really hurt me at the time. I was like, what do you mean? Like, wasn't that mix good? I mean, and the answer was no, it wasn't that good. And so he came up to me and, he said that. He's just like, maybe you jumped into mixing too early. Maybe you have a little more work to do before you can really consider yourself a mix engineer. And I was really hurt at the time.
Yeah.
It spurred me to really dig in and try to get better and be better and to have a higher standard for myself. And though I was hurt at the time, now years later, I've actually run into him a couple of times and I thanked him. I'm like, look, you said some harsh truth to me, but it was the right thing. So yeah, that's one thing. Don't try to do what you're not really seriously capable of. No matter how badly you want to do it, no matter how much you want to be ready, seriously judge for yourself whether you are ready or not.
So how do you balance that attitude of what you put out into what you're doing in the world or what you're offering to other people when you're trying to grow? Like if you want to grow as a mixing engineer, the only way to do that is to mix or to be working on things. So how do you find that balance of kind of biting off a little bit more than you can chew, but not biting off so much that you're disappointing people and they never talk to you again?
That answer is easily. Don't take risks publicly.
Yep.
Do as many indie records as you can. Work with your friends. Do your own stuff and work through all your kinks and your problems until at some point you might feel like, all right, well, I feel like I'm ready to go out there and take a risk. It's just I think it's serious self-evaluation.
Yeah.
And trying to be real with yourself about, hey, is this really good enough? As musicians and producers and songwriters early in our career, we're always like taking what we've just done and we're showing people and going, what do you think of it? What do you think of it? Judge me, tell me, give me some input, some feedback. And you and I both get emails all the time, questions about, hey, take a listen to this. Tell me, what you think of it. Well, it doesn't really matter what I think of it. You have to be confident enough that it's good and ready to go. And so as a young artist or a young engineer or a young producer, you're always trying to find that place where you feel confident enough that something you've just done is good enough to fit into the mix with everybody else. That's a tough judgment call to make. I don't know if there was ever a point where I started feeling like, all right, now I feel like everything I'm doing, or at least most of what I'm doing, is presentable, and I feel professional and whatnot.
Yep.
That's I think everybody's got to feel out, and you'll make a lot of mistakes, man. I made tons of mistakes. I screwed a whole bunch of stuff up.
Yeah.
And I still screw stuff up. The beautiful part about what I think we do with making records is that it is a lifelong process, and you're learning all the time. And once you get to this place where you're just accepting new information all the time, you're trying to learn all the time, you're trying to be academic about what you do, and you're open to criticism, and you're trying to be as self-aware as possible so that you can do the best work you can. I mean, I think that's the great place to be. If you ever make it in the music business, I think that's where it is. It's just like, now you're sort of super aware, and you're just trying to reevaluate yourself at every step, and you're being really conscious about the decisions that you make to augment what you do to try to get further down the road towards where you want to be.
I think you hit it right on the nail there. Like, we had a question there in the live chat, like, how do you know when you're ready? Like, you're ready when you feel like you are ready. Like, when you have that confidence and that, like, I know that I got this.
I think, for me, like, there's always this one point where, like, if something's good, I'm like, okay, whether I'm doing it or somebody else is doing it, I'm like, it's the whole white man bob the head kind of thing. Pretty cool, man. But I think the point where, like, either something that you're working with or working on, or something that you're actually doing yourself, if it makes you stamp your foot and go, holy shit, that's good. Yeah. That's a good place to be. So if anything excites you that much, I think that's definitely something worth sharing and putting out there. And if the response is critical, fine, that's a learning opportunity. If the response is really, really positive, then you might feel like you're onto something. That's kind of like one of the great things. There's a lot of anticipation in what we do, where we're creating stuff and we're sort of designing it so that other people can consume it and give us some sort of reaction.
So back to the career side of things, like, you mentioned networking is the number one key to, kind of moving your career along. Was there a point where it just started working for you? Like, how did you start getting in these rooms with Eminem, Jay-Z, Usher? How did you get inserted into those situations?
Well, for me, I was extraordinarily fortunate. I started working with a producer back in, I think, 2002 or 2003. This guy named Just Blaze, who was pretty hot. I mean, he was working on a lot of this stuff, and so I kind of got pulled along into the room with a lot of the big hip hop artists back in the early 2000s, because I was affiliated, associated with him, and I was tracking and mixing pretty much everything that he did. But I also had a career outside of that at the same time, and it goes back to the networking thing. Like, I think I was able to work enough where, like, I was meeting people in studios all the time, and I would talk to them and be like, hey, what's up, man? What are you working on? Blah, blah, blah. And then the next week I might get a call from that same person. Yo, we're doing an Anthony Hamilton record, or we're doing a John Legend record. Really love to have you in the studio. So part of it is trying to be on top of your game and being as good technically and as creatively as you possibly can. But if you're not in front of people, by working in the studios that they're working in, inserting yourself in the community, nobody's gonna, it's not like they have your business card from a year ago and they're gonna be like, oh, I really need this guy on the record. No, it's all about spontaneity, a sense of urgency, who's moving and shaking at the time. And if you make your presence known in the community, people will remember you. And if you try to be as helpful as possible, that's the other thing. Like, what are you doing? What are you offering? Am I trying to be helpful or not? I frequently find myself, I'll spend an hour on the phone with somebody or going over their stuff. If I consider them to be a professional and that they, may be, a future business client, or even if I just find the music really, really cool, I try to participate as much as possible. You gotta be there in order to be involved, right? Yep. think that's a mistake a lot of people make. I'll give you a great example. I have a buddy who lives out in the middle of, I think it's Missouri. Sorry, Tim, if I'm mistaken. His name's Tim Hansen. He has a studio called North Village Recording. And he's not in a major area of music making, but that guy is doing it out there, man. Mm-hmm. He's got a nice studio. He's a great guy. And you know what is really great about Tim is he participates in the community. He does it online with his social media, and he develops personal relationships. And he and I have become friends over, like some silly post that I made. And I realized how he's out there. He's recording every day. He's mixing every day. He's mastering. He's got a really active facility out there where you wouldn't consider it a music making center, of energy. Mm-hmm. But that guy has made it his business to be engaged, and and we live in this great time right now where we have all these ways of being connected on Facebook and communities and forums, and we go to NAMM and AES and that kind of stuff. You can choose to be involved. Yeah. And I think that's a huge key. First off, that's a turn on to people who are creative.
Yep.
When you're choosing to be engaged. I'm attracted to people, who really want to be engaged too, who want to have the conversation, who want to show up, and who are really enthralled with the whole process of making records. And those folks range the gamut from people you've never heard of before to people who are making huge major records. Yeah. I think being engaged fully and being committed to it is a huge way to make sure that you at least have the tools and the mechanisms you need in order to insert yourself in the music community and start making records.
I love what you brought up there though too, of like for us it's about being in New York City. Like that was a big key to both of our careers and like how it happened. But what you just pointed out there is like this can happen online now. It does happen on Facebook and through forums and websites. You're able to form professional and like meaningful musical connections with people literally anywhere in the world.
Totally. I mean, we have great. Just look at Puremix by itself. I mean, you've got Mark, who's over in Columbus, right? Columbus, yep. Ohio. You have Alberto, he's in what, Munich or Berlin?
He's in Berlin now, yeah.
Berlin now, yeah. I mean, and just people from all around the world who are participating in our community. These are active members that we talk to all the time, almost every day. And yep. What was great about coming to New York for me was at the time we didn't have all this stuff. And I know I'm dating myself, but that's all right. The music community, the movers and shakers, are a pretty relatively small group, a couple hundred people in New York. And the key with networking here is to come and meet people, be in the studios, be in the clubs at night, go to the rehearsals, do the social stuff, and just like get to know everybody. Mm-hmm. And making sure that you try to connect with people as much as possible, because you want people to remember you when it comes time. I don't care what you do, if you're a flautist and you go to a party and you meet somebody like producer Ben Lindell, you're gonna be like, hey Ben, well, here's my card, I do flute and I really like to just rock out or whatever. Ben might remember you next week when he's got another big record on Sony that's coming out that needs like a superstar flautist. But it's being there at the time and knowing the people and trying to be as helpful as possible. Yeah. I think the mistake that a lot of people make is they try to insert themselves by self-promotion, and that's not what it's really about. It's about how can I be helpful? How if I'm really the right person for this gig, I can add something to this record, then everybody's going to win because it's the right combination of things. Yeah. That's, I think, my mindset. Everything I think comes down to mindset in the music business.
Yep.
Techniques are great, but if you don't have the right mindset, you're kind of lost.
Dude, I think it's really telling that when we have conversations like this, we end up, you and I especially, whenever you and I talk about music stuff, we always end up in this area talking about the mindset and like just how this is a people business. It's a service business. It is.
Totally. Yeah.
It's not about the gear, the plugins, the microphone. None of that stuff really, end of the day, matters as much as the connection that you have with the musicians in the room, the connection that they have with their audiences, the connection. That's, to me, that's what it's all about.
I can't disagree with you at all. I mean, I can't see how it would work any other way.
Yeah.
Right. And in the end, we're all just sort of individuals out here with our own stories. What connects us to other people who are making records? Why would somebody want to hire us to make a record with them?
What had a really good question from our Facebook group. Do you have what's the funniest or freakiest studio story you've ever had? And you don't have to mention names if it if it's a confidential thing.
I haven't had really a lot of freaky ones. I did have Old Dirty Bastard in my studio 2 weeks before he died, and he peed in the corner. But that's about as freaky. That's about as freaky as. I mean, he was completely out of it. The guy was obviously altered, and he had to pee, and the closest place was a corner.
When you gotta go, you gotta go. That's just how it works. Nice.
I'll forever remember his Tinkle's the Dirty Bastard.
Yep, exactly. I reflect so many times on I don't do a lot of hip hop sessions anymore, plainly because of the time, like that, midnight to 8 a.m. schedule. Like I did that.
No, I don't do that anymore. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Right. That's the beauty of having the internet and being able to have people to send us the files. It's like they can work on it at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I can wake up at 9 in the morning and work on it during the day. Let
the young whippersnappers, let the 20-year-olds who don't know any better, like I was back when I was 24, 25, doing it. 120 hours a week sleeping underneath the console. Mm-hmm. Just sort of like trying to avoid the blunt roaches on the floor, and
Yep, the good old days. So let's loop it back around a little bit, and we have a few more technical questions that pop up all the time that I really want to get your opinion on.
Yeah.
So let's talk. Two things: analog summing, in the box summing, mix bus compression, and mix bus tools. I know you in the the tutorials that we have with you; those were all done in the box. And I know that in the last year or two, you've switched to a very hybrid setup.
Yeah, I always, for the last maybe 5 or 6 years, I've used sort of really basic summing setup. It was just a dangerous D-box. I was only doing 8 channels of summing, and I did notice a qualitative difference. But it wasn't until I moved to quite a few more channels of summing where I really recognized the benefit of it.
Really? What was that?
I can now actually sit and listen to a mixed record and tell you whether it was mixed in the box or not. And maybe that's subjective to most people, and maybe the end listener doesn't really floor them all that much. But I think overall, I think people react to mixes that are have the qualities of using external summing or being mixed through an external mixer, have sort of intangible benefits that are hard for people to put their finger on and maybe describe. But it's generally, when I use summing as opposed to mixing in the box, the difference that I hear is that, especially if I'm starting the mix with the summing and everything's sort of spread out, I get, this really incredible opportunity for front to back depth and for punch and for clarity that I don't get when I'm just mixing in the box. So just mix. I talked earlier about I'm trying to design a mix space, right? So I'm trying to define where this performance of this song takes place and sort of present it that way in the way that I mix things. When I'm mixing in the box, my mix space is about yay big, right?
Yep.
And I can make a good sounding mix, and it'll sound balanced, and I can even make it punchy and forward, like aggressive or whatever other adjective you want to talk about. But when I'm using analog summing, or if I'm mixing on a great console, the availability for space is not limited here for me. The panning opportunities get much wider. Yeah. My top to bottom availability of headroom is much, much bigger. But more importantly, the availability of space from the front to the back of the mix expands exponentially.
Yeah.
So doing things like designing reverbs and delays, and I'm doing my panning initially in my session, if I'm using analog summing, it just has this function of being able to really place things in very specific places inside the mix. So I can have my vocal right here, and then I can design a reverb that's right behind it. Yeah. And then I can put a little bit of delay that's out here. Whereas in the box, everything is sort of a little bit more here. It's a little bit more closed. So it just seems like when I'm using analog summing, especially the gear that I'm using right now, I'm using a lot of dangerous gear. I have the dangerous Convert 8s, Convert 2, and the 2-bus plus. It just gives me this huge space to work in.
Yeah.
So initially when I'm starting a mix, it's like if you have a painting and your canvas is this big, as opposed to being this big, there's just a whole lot more that you could do.
Yeah.
And we're talking in terms of pan law and headroom availability in the mix.
Well,
so for me,
I mean, that's always the question that people have about summing is like, what are the benefits of it? And that's how you explain it is exactly what most people feel.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, when they try to do like an A/B comparison, they'll take a mix that they did in the box, and then they'll just simply switch the output so that it's spread out a bunch of, through a number of inputs on an analog summing device. And you don't really immediately hear a huge difference right there. You wouldn't, because that, just the discrete analog paths themselves, although they do offer something, just as, a remedy when you start, just putting stuff out of separate outputs, you might hear some difference. You might hear a little bit of, achievement in terms of how much headroom is available in the mix, how much further you can push it, how hard you might hit the input side of the summing box. But the real advantage is when you start, even when you can even use it starting when you're tracking. But I think when you first start a mix and you just push things out to all these individual outputs with great converters like Convert 8 or any of these higher end converters that we're using these days, you start to build the mix into a completely different space than maybe you would have if you were just doing it in the box.
Yeah.
So that's where the advantage comes in, is you do end up with, for me, I end up with a better end result because I'm pushing into a much larger space when I'm using great analog summing opposed to when I've just got this limited sort of firewall when I'm dealing with left and right coming out of a Pro Tools interface. It's just not quite as good.
So are you using analog processing and analog summing together?
If I feel like it really needs it, yes. I'm again, it's one of those things where I'm making a decision on every song. If I can't get what I'm looking for from a plugin or some other way, then maybe the solution is a great piece of hardware that's just going to lend some life to something. Like I have a couple of compressors that nothing else will do for a lead vocal. I just need that sound. I have an Anthony Demaro 1000 mono compressor that just sings on certain vocals, and some vocals it really needs a hardware LE2A. Some vocals it really needs a plugin. I mean, I try to make a decision based on what I'm facing every individual time.
Nice. So what are number one question I've seen this written down in like 2 or 3 places now. What are Ryan West's favorite go-to plugins?
Oh, well, you and I often get asked about what do we have on our master buzz. I change that up quite a bit. I don't always use compression. I don't always use EQ on the master bus. It really depends, because I don't mix into it. I don't push into those things. And I really never start to set up stuff on the mix bus until later on in the mix, where I feel like I can't describe why it is that I feel like at a certain point it's time to start doing that. But I feel like maybe the mix is like 90% together, and then I want to start seeing how it feels as I'm pushing a little bit into the stuff that's on the master fader. But almost invariably, there are a few things that I think really add to the mix, and haven't really never failed me. I love the UAD ATR 102 mastering tape machine plugin. I think it really adds an element of excitement to almost any mix. And it really depends on how hard you're hitting it. So I'm always playing with the input volume to it.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I've had a mix in the last 2 years or so that haven't benefited from it. My thing with it is I bring it up to the default setting. I turn the noise off because I don't want the noise. And I change it to a 456 tape formulation in 1/4 inch mode. And I'm just adjusting how much I'm hitting on the input side to see how much I really want that to, be a part of the sound. So I do turn to that an awful lot. That's probably the only thing on the master bus. But some of my favorite plugins, I use a lot of the same things in plugin land that I would use in analog world.
Yeah.
So if I have like a background drum bus, or rather if I have a drum bus and I need to EQ it, I'm going to go for something that's really, really musical. So I might go for a Manley Massive Passive on my drum bus, or a curve bender, or something that I feel like is going to give me like a really nice musical response because I'm looking to make the drums sort of like really just amazing on their own, and so that they can fit in a certain part of the mix, and I can build other stuff around it. So I guess favorite plugins, yeah, definitely the Massive Passive. A lot of them are going to be UAD plugins because I'm just a huge fan of what they do over there.
Yeah.
Let's see what else. I think the Waves Abbey Road plates are pretty fantastic.
Oh yeah, those are good.
The EMT 250 plate from UAD again that's one of the reverbs I use just constantly. The Ocean Way room plugin, what do they call it again? Ocean Way.
Something. I think it's Ocean Way Studio or something like that. It's
I'm using that because I get a lot of things that seem to be they're tracked without a lot of room mics. And so that's a great way to make up for that scenario where I'll take the whole drum bus and I'll send it over to that as a reverb and sort of like create a drum mic or room mic out of it so that I can compress it and, do what I want to make the drum kit sort of breathe in a certain way. Or I might even add a bit of that to a submix. So I might submix all my vocals to one bus, and I might even add just a little bit of that ambience to it so that the vocals all seem to have sort of like, they exist in a certain space inside the mix, and they all have some sort of consistency. But then I'm processing them off to the side on their own in parallel and doing other kind of crazy things like longer delays, longer haul, verbs from like a lexicon or something, or Vercasti. It just allows me to create layers of stuff. I'm trying to think of other plugins. I mean, I kind of use things as I need them. I don't have things that I use all the time, except for maybe those couple examples.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk gain staging. So gain staging and the master bus. I've gotten a couple of questions about this, directly about gain staging on the master bus, but I had another question come from Twitter where they were asking, how do you effectively raise your RMS levels so that, when you're sending mixes to clients, their first comment back isn't, oh, why is this so much quieter than all the references I gave you?
Yeah, I mean, part of me is a little bit indignant about that. I try to help my clients expect better, which is, hey, does it sound great? Is it dynamic? Like, is the mix doing all the things? Don't worry about how loud it is. You have a volume knob on the thing that you're listening on. You can just turn that up, right? Yeah. So as technophiles, we're always interested in upping the ante and making sure that, people aren't expecting too much in terms of loudness. But you will have those clients who are, just kind of like have a little bit of Neanderthal mentality about, how loud something's supposed to be. And in those scenarios, you have to, you were absolutely right, Ben, earlier when you said this is a service industry and you've got to please the client. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll send them two versions. It only takes me a minute to do it. I'll send them one. I was like, look, this is the one where I feel like this one should go to mastering and it has all the dynamics. And I think we should try to understand that mastering engineers have a job for a reason.
Yeah.
But if you want something loud to listen to that's going to give you the impression of something that's much closer to being done, then here's something with limiter on it. And sometimes that just includes some bus compression, maybe a limiter, maybe a multi-band compressor where I'm letting the low end escape a little bit, and then I'm compressing the mids and the highs so that it sounds a little bit more forward. You have to cater to your client that way and make sure that they're getting what they want out of it. But you also, I think we also have to be educators sometimes to some clients. Just like, look, well, there's a reason why these two versions exist. Here's one that's loud, here's one that's not, and here's why I did it.
Yeah.
And I think next time you find yourself working with that client, they have a better understanding and they'll know what to expect, and they'll ask for one or the other.
So do you ever take that into consideration though? So I totally agree with your perspective on, educating and not shooting for a pancake at the mix level.
I don't like that.
But do you ever actually, is that, to a certain degree, like that is the sound that some people are expecting? Is that like 2-track mixtape kind of quality? How, do you ever actually choose that as like, this is the sonic direction I want this to go in?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's an okay decision to make. If you really want to push it to that degree and that's the sound you're going for, then I totally think you should commit to it. But I try to get that, in the mix itself rather than it being something that I'm applying to a mix, or like a bus compressor or any kind of, bus effects or something that's over the entire mix. I'll set up like a bunch of sub mixes where I'm like really pushing the compression in parallel, and I'm getting it super like aggressive and designing the sound from there. That's why I'm one of those people that's of the philosophy that I don't really mix in the bus compressor or anything that's on a mix bus until much later in the mix, because I really want the thing to work without that. I don't want that to be the solution. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of mixes that if you go into the mix session and you just turn off the bus compressor, it just completely falls apart. Yeah. It's not, you know, that's defining way too much of the sound. Does that make me old school or new school? I don't know, but I really design the sounds, you know, from their source, so that they work a whole lot better. And I'm not trying to fix it with stuff that's on the master. I think that you should be able to take stuff off your master bus or off your mix bus, and it still feels pretty cohesive. It should just be another level of lift, another level of excitement that you're getting there, rather than a major component of the sound.
Yeah, exactly. So we're getting close here on time. We're like just a little bit over an hour, so I don't want to use too much more of your time. So do like 1 or 2 more questions. Is that cool with you?
I'm totally down. Yeah.
Cool, man. Go back here, and so I got. All right, this is a question for me again from watching your tutorials. I know you don't color code your tracks. What's with that, man? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I know. Well, here's the thing. Sometimes it's just a matter of expediency. Like if you're doing 2 or 3 mixes a day, and I don't employ like assistants or interns or anything else like that. I'm a one-man operation. So sometimes I kind of already, because where I put stuff in a session, I'm organized enough just visually to get through it, and I don't really need to color code it. If it's a larger session, I'll certainly do that. If it's a project-wide sort of thing, I'll do that, because then I have things that I can refer to in each mix that maybe out of 10 or 12 or 14, and I can kind of go back and grab things. So I'll be a little bit more organized. I'm a little bit of a nut about naming things, but the color coding, up until recently, hasn't been such a big thing for me.
Yeah.
Not sure why. I mean, I think it's a huge benefit to be able to have a visual reference for your session. If you just sit back and you look and like, here's my drums, they're all in green. Here's my bass, it's in blue because blue starts with a B. Here's my vocals that are in, you know, fuchsia, magenta, because they just sound lovely.
Uh-huh.
You know,
I mean, to me, half the mixing is how you paint your Pro Tools window, you know?
I'm sure I could do a better job with that. And I have actually been trying to do that a little bit more, probably more because a lot of the producers that I've been working with recently are sending stuff already color coded, and I'm very appreciative of that. Yeah. When I get something from a producer or an artist and it's like really organized, like my first thing to do is like be on the phone. I'm like, thank you. I really appreciate your attention to the detail. You don't know how much better you're making my day right now.
Uh-huh. Yep, absolutely. So let's go. We'll make this the last question here. Reference mixes. So I know there's a bunch of different ways that reference mixes do come into play when we're working. There's, you know, the rough mix from the client. There's the, you know, Spotify or YouTube links of what they want to sound like. And then there's often like your personal stash of songs that you know and that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Do you listen a lot, like while you're working, before you're working? Kind of run us through your reference mix routine.
Well, constantly. I mean, I think it starts with the conversation with the client from day one. I mean, part of one of the first things I ask people is like, you know, what's your idea of what this should sound like? Are there other records that you've heard that maybe it's just, you know, like you really dig them and they're inspiration for you? Not that you want to make your record sound like it, but what is it that's in your head when you're making this record? Yeah. And it's a psychology experiment. I think I'm trying to get into the head of the person who made the record to begin with. What was their impetus? You know, and so I'll ask for references. I'll actively ask for references. And I really do want to hear them. If for no other reason than I could just sort of like listen to it and digest it for a second. And that vibe is sort of like, it's in my, you know, in my zone. Mm-hmm. And so when I start listening to I have this way of connecting with what they were thinking about when they were making the record. To me, that's really, really important. If for no other reason than that I've been able to consistently deliver something that's much closer to the artist or the producer's idea of what they wanted the mix to be like with the first pass, which means, I mean, it's sort of just like a business decision to say, I'm going to be smart about this and try to hit closer to where they want to be on the first pass, so that I'm not making 8, 9 passes, and then we're having a discussion at pass 13 about, well, I really want it to be like, a Beyonce record or whatever. Oh, well, I had no idea that's where your head was,
Yeah.
And it can inform you to things like, where does the lead vocal sit in it? What's the balance like in the track? How big is the low end? How important are the drums?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of elements, are in these mixes that this person's telling me that they really, really like. Their production invariably is going to sound much different than the references they give you, but it can inform you, I think, to just where their head was, and knowing that, I think, can be really, really helpful in sort of getting to what they're after, and sort of like the overall tone palette of the record much more quickly than you would otherwise.
Do you also find you use reference mixes like when you're going into a new space, going into a new studio? How do you get acclimated to a different room and set of speakers?
That's the only way to do it. You got to bring stuff that what it sounds like in the place that you're familiar with working. So I know how things sound at my place. I know how things sound in every room at Flux Studios. I know how things sound at certain other places that I work, fairly frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So and I'll do that even in rooms that I'm familiar with. Like if I go to work at the Dangerous Room at Flux, I'll still put stuff up just to sort of like refill the well of what my expectation is for the way things should sound. I think that's an important part of it is anybody who makes music in whatever capacity has an expectation of the way they want things to sound. And so when they're writing music, or they're producing it, or they're arranging it, or they're engineering it, or they're mixing it, or they're mastering it, they're drawing on a long history of expectations. I listened to a whole lot of like Elvis Costello and Prince and Michael Jackson growing up. And so those pop sensibilities informed the way that I like things to sound. With that type of music. So that's part of my well of things that I'm drawing on when I hear a record that somehow fits into the same vein. I'm like, oh, well, like I feel like keyboards should be doing this kind of thing, because it's just something that I want to hear. It's a very selfish process, actually, sometimes. It's like, I want to hear this record this way. And those are all, that all comes from just what our musical listening preferences that have been our entire non-professional life leading up into our professional career in music. We develop those things over time. It becomes like a catalog of the way we understand how we enjoy music.
Exactly. Like that's end of the day, like whenever we're working on a record, like we're just trying to make it sound what sounds best to us and to the client, and to their audiences. But end of the day, like the filter that are on your ears is your experience that you can't.
Yeah. It's the sound in your head, man. That's it.
Yeah. That's it. It's all we're going for is just taking the sound that's in our head and trying to get it out into the world.
I think that's what makes really amazing mixers like Sheps and Fab DuPont really interesting is that like you got to wonder what they were listening to all their life that built this amazing level of expectation of quality. But quality doesn't just mean like high definition or like super open and expansive. It's all about creative vision. How do all the elements come together to create something that moves people emotionally? And then that's what we're really trying to do. We want to make records that are stunning, in one way or the other. And it doesn't have to be all about audio fidelity. I mean, we've all heard records that like by any standard sound like total shit, but taken together, the bass just marrying right with the kick drum and the groove just being right, and the lead vocal, it may sound, from a high five perspective, it may sound absolutely terrible, but in context with everything in the record, can make the thing.
Yeah, and that's exactly, and it was something you touched on earlier too, talking about like what your expectations are. I've had the same conversation with Fab of, the thing that drives him to always be not just doing but trying to do it better is like we just all set this crazy high bar of expectations for ourselves that we're never actually achieving. We're never actually getting there, but that's what drives us to continue to like learn and push ourselves to try new things. Is we want to keep doing better, keep sounding better, keep on, working better, making better music with better clients. Like it's that striving to go further that you have to have that drive. Otherwise, you might be better off doing something else, in my opinion.
That's my opinion too. Like the day that you, I guess, wake up feeling like you either know everything or you're done learning, I mean, you should go do something else and go learn to do that and be excited by that. And you'll probably be amazing at it.
Exactly. Awesome. So that segues perfectly into like a fully shameless like Puremix plug right here to wrap it up. So right now, Ryan's videos, we have 2 tutorials and 2 full-length mixing videos and a tutorial about delays. We put them together as a bundle, and it's like $50 for like, I think it's almost like 4 hours of videos. So if you're not sick and tired of watching Ryan's face yet, then you should probably go ahead and watch all of his other videos, which are on Puremix. I've watched them myself. They're great. He goes more into the technical side of like actually EQing, compressing, setting up the sessions, all that, like literally from the beginning of a rough mix to like a final mix are all in these videos. So if you guys have enjoyed what Ryan's had to say on, the mindset, on, how he approaches summing, all of these different aspects that we touched on today, I would highly recommend checking out those videos on Puremix. And if you check them out before the end of the month, you get them for a better deal. So I don't think there's any reason to not do that. Ryan, anything else you want to share with the world before we jump off?
Oh, no, not too much, but it'd be great to encourage everybody if anybody's watched this and they have any more questions, or if anybody's watching any of the stuff on Puremix, we should do a little post on Puremixers on Facebook.
Yes, absolutely.
We can have a discussion about anything that maybe we skipped over, or anything anybody wants to talk about. I don't care. I'm down for it.
I will post the link for the Puremixers group here as well. So in the live chat, I just put the Puremixers Facebook group. This is our closed little group. It's filled with everybody that's in the Puremix family. You'll see people like Ryan, John, Mick, Fab, Andrew. You'll see everybody showing up there and chiming in from time to time. There's just a really nice, supportive, and intelligent community, which I actually enjoy, like answering questions on here as opposed to a lot of forums where I just instantly go into some sort of like
self-protection mode. Like, I'm not here.
Exactly. So yeah, I highly suggest checking out the Puremixers. Check out Ryan's videos. I also have a small favor, if you guys are still watching, to fill out this survey form that I also posted a link for. We're continuing to try new things with Puremix Live. As you may notice today, it's a slightly different setup. We didn't have our fancy cameras or fancy lighting or graphics or any of that stuff. This is a very raw version of Puremix Live.
My fault. Yeah.
All Ryan's fault. He had to go to this beautiful mountain vista view. And
terrible with my friends and this horrible looking place.
Yeah. So to do it through the internet, we had the video quality came down a little bit, but I feel like the content quality and what the conversation we were able to have today, like this was, at least for me, man, this was insightful, very interesting. And I love hearing your ideas and aspect and just thought process on how you approach music and mixing and clients and everything like that. It's stuff that you won't really see a tutorial video talking about, like how do you network, how do clients find you, how do you make that happen in your career. It's through conversations and stuff like this that people actually get that information, which is just as valuable as pan laws and compression and EQ and all that kind of stuff.
It's funny how simple that stuff is, and people, there are some people that we interface with a lot, like Mr. Freeman on Facebook. I don't know if you know Alpha Freeman. He shows up to literally every networking event he possibly can. We call him the ambassador now. And I think it's a great way, not only to make your way in the music business, but to get through life. It's just to talk to people who are doing the kind of stuff that you love, man.
That's it. That's exactly it. Great. Well, Ryan, dude, thank you so much for taking time out today and chatting with me and sharing what you share with our entire community. We had a constant 60 to 80 people in here at all times through this whole conversation, watching and asking questions. So I want to thank you, Ryan, for being here.
Thank you.
I also want to thank everybody that tuned in today. You guys are the reason why we show up and do this. If there wasn't an audience, we wouldn't keep doing it. So as long as you guys keep showing up, we'll keep on making more and more Puremix content, more and more Puremix live sessions. If you guys have any ideas or requests, let me know in that type form survey or shoot me an email. My email is really easy. It's ben@puremix.net. I'll get back to you if you have a cool idea. We love getting ideas from our community. So don't stop sharing, don't stop discussing, don't stop growing. Just keep on mixing, guys.
Yeah, man.
All right. Well, Ryan, thanks again, man. I will talk to you soon.
I'll see you when I get back.
All right, man.
Bye, Ben. Thanks.